The city of Ashcroft never truly slept. Even after midnight, its skyline shimmered with silver light, while distant sirens blended into the hum of traffic below. Somewhere high above the streets, hidden in the darkness between two rooftops, a lone figure lay perfectly still. His breathing was slow, measured, patient. His name was Elias Thorne. To law enforcement, he was a ghost. To private security firms, he was a nightmare. To the criminal underworld, he was something even rarer, a legend. For nearly 20 years, Elias had accomplished what no one else could. He had slipped into museums protected by military-grade sensors, cracked billionaire vaults designed to withstand explosives, and vanished before anyone realized anything was missing. He never carried a gun. He never harmed innocent people. He never stole sentimental belongings. Gold, diamonds, rare documents, black market artifacts, those were his targets. His rules were simple. Never kill. Never panic. Never get caught. Tonight was supposed to be just another job. Across the street stood the prestigious Blackwood Museum, a fortress disguised as a palace. Inside rested the museum's newest acquisition, a sapphire known as the Midnight Crown, valued at over $50 million. Every entrance was monitored. Laser grids protected every hallway. Pressure-sensitive flooring covered the exhibit room. Infrared cameras rotated silently from every corner. The museum director had proudly announced only days earlier that stealing the sapphire would be physically impossible. Elias smiled. He had heard those words before. At exactly 12:07 a.m., he adjusted the tiny earpiece in his ear and studied the building through a compact digital scope. 3 guards. 1 janitor. 2 security patrols. Every movement happened precisely on schedule. People trusted routines. That was always their weakness. He waited another 30 seconds. A light drizzle began to fall across the rooftops. Perfect. Rain softened sound. Rain blurred camera lenses. Rain made everyone hurry. Without making a single unnecessary movement, Elias fired a thin carbon fiber line toward the museum roof. The hook landed without a sound. Seconds later, he disappeared into the darkness. Inside the ventilation system, every inch had already been memorized weeks earlier from stolen architectural plans. Left. Right. Drop. Pause. The rhythm felt almost musical. Every motion matched the ticking of his custom-built watch. He reached the laser corridor. Instead of trying to dodge the beams, he removed a tiny mirrored prism from his pocket. The device scattered the lasers just enough to create a narrow invisible tunnel. He stepped through. Not a single alarm reacted. Minutes later, he stood before the sapphire. It rested beneath bulletproof glass. Most thieves would have attacked the case. Elias examined the pedestal instead. A nearly invisible vibration sensor rested underneath. He nodded quietly. Clever. From another pocket, he produced a small tuning fork. 1 precise strike. The fork vibrated at an exact frequency. The sensor briefly lost calibration. For 3 seconds. The pedestal believed nothing had changed. 3 seconds were enough. The glass lifted. The sapphire disappeared. The glass settled back into place. No alarms. No flashing lights. Nothing. By the time the museum systems completed their next diagnostic cycle, Elias was already climbing back across the rooftops under the rain. Another impossible vault. Another perfect escape. Another victory. Yet strangely, he felt nothing. No excitement. No pride. Only silence. Years ago, every successful heist had filled him with adrenaline. Now they felt like repeating the same sentence over and over again. He returned to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. Maps. Blueprints. Ancient locks. Mechanical tools. Shelves lined with books about engineering, architecture, music theory, and psychology. Nothing suggested the home of a criminal. Everything suggested the home of a perfectionist. He carefully placed the sapphire inside a secure steel case. Locked it. Turned away without even looking at it again. Money had stopped mattering long ago. What Elias chased now wasn't wealth. It was perfection. If a vault existed, he wanted to know he could open it. That obsession had quietly replaced every other purpose in his life. The warehouse echoed with complete silence. No family photographs. No laughter. No memories. Only work. As dawn approached, Elias sat beside a dusty window with a cup of black coffee. For reasons he couldn't explain, sleep refused to come. Instead, an old feeling stirred deep inside him. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Restlessness. The following evening brought another storm. Heavy clouds rolled across Ashcroft while thunder echoed over the river. Elias left the warehouse with no destination in mind. He rarely wandered. Every step of his life usually served a purpose. Tonight, he simply walked. The streets grew quieter as midnight approached. Old brick houses replaced modern buildings. Streetlights became fewer. The city suddenly felt decades older. Then, he heard it. A single piano note floated through the rain. Soft. Fragile. Beautiful. Elias stopped instantly. Another note followed. Then another. Within seconds, the melody wrapped around the empty street like invisible mist. It wasn't merely music. It felt familiar. His heartbeat slowed. His hands, usually steady enough to dismantle a bank vault, began trembling. No. He whispered unconsciously. Impossible. He hadn't heard that melody in more than 25 years. Yet every note landed exactly where his memory expected it. Not almost. Exactly. The pianist made no mistakes. The pauses. The rhythm. Even the tiny imperfections. Everything matched. Elias crossed the street almost without realizing it. The music came from a weathered Victorian house standing alone behind an iron fence. Warm light glowed through the windows. The front garden had been neglected for years. Roses climbed over broken stone walls. Wind chimes swayed gently beneath the porch roof. The piano continued. Elias slowly approached one of the rain-covered windows. Inside sat an elderly man. Gray hair. Simple clothes. Straight posture. His fingers moved across the piano keys with impossible confidence. But what caught Elias's attention wasn't the music. It was the man's eyes. They never looked at the keyboard. They stared peacefully into darkness. Clouded. Unfocused. Blind. The old man was completely blind. Yet somehow, he played the exact lullaby Elias believed had vanished forever. A song no recording contained. A song no published sheet music had ever documented. A song only one person had ever played for him. His mother. Elias staggered backward. Rain soaked his coat, but he no longer noticed. His chest tightened. Memories burst through the walls he had spent decades building. A small wooden house. A warm fireplace. A little girl laughing. His mother's gentle voice humming beside an old upright piano. Then. Flames. Smoke. Shouting. Running. Silence. The memories disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. Elias gripped the iron fence until his knuckles turned white. His carefully controlled breathing collapsed into uneven gasps. Who was this man? How could he know that melody? The music ended. Silence returned to the street. Inside the house, the blind pianist slowly closed the piano lid. Without turning toward the window. Without opening his eyes. Without making the slightest sign of surprise. The old man spoke quietly into the empty room. "I've been wondering." He paused. "How much longer you intended to stand in the rain, Elias?" Every muscle in Elias's body froze. He had never met this man. He had never spoken his name. And yet, the blind pianist knew exactly who was waiting outside. For several long seconds, Elias Thorne couldn't move. The rain drummed against the old Victorian house, but he barely heard it. Every instinct he had developed over 2 decades screamed the same warning. Leave. Disappear. Erase every trace. Yet his feet refused to obey. Inside the house, the old man remained seated at the piano, his clouded eyes staring into darkness. "I've made tea," the old man said calmly. "It will get cold." Elias frowned. Most people reacted to fear by raising their voices. This man sounded as though he had been expecting an old friend. Keeping one hand inside his coat, where a small lock pick could double as a weapon if necessary, Elias slowly opened the rusted iron gate. It creaked softly as he walked toward the porch. Each step felt strangely familiar, as if he had walked this path years before. He knocked once. The front door swung open almost immediately. No locks. No security chain. No hesitation. "Come in," the old man called from the next room. Elias entered cautiously. The house smelled of polished wood, old books, and fresh tea. Unlike the neglected garden outside, the interior was spotless. Shelves overflowed with music books. Framed photographs covered the walls, though many had faded with age. An antique grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Everything felt frozen in another era. The blind man smiled faintly. "You may stop looking for hidden cameras," he said. "There aren't any." Elias froze again. He hadn't made a sound. "Who are you?" Elias asked quietly. "My name is Samuel Arden." "And how do you know mine?" Samuel poured tea into 2 porcelain cups before answering. "There are many ways to recognize someone. I asked a simple question. And simple questions rarely have simple answers." Elias remained standing. "I've never seen you before." Samuel nodded. "That is true. Then tell me how you knew my name." Instead of answering, Samuel pointed toward the piano. "Do you recognize the melody?" Elias felt his heartbeat quicken. "Where did you learn it?" Samuel's fingers rested gently on the keys. "That wasn't my question." After several seconds, Elias finally whispered. "Yes. It belonged to someone. It belonged to my mother." Samuel nodded as though he had expected the answer. "I know." Silence swallowed the room. Elias suddenly stepped forward. "Who told you about her?" "No one." "Then how?" Samuel simply smiled. The truth has strange ways of finding those willing to hear it. Frustration flared inside Elias. He had interrogated crime bosses, escaped police detectives, and negotiated with dangerous smugglers. Never had anyone answered so little while revealing so much. He set the untouched tea on the table. "I'm leaving." "I know. And if you truly know who I am," Samuel continued, "then you'll come back tomorrow night." Elias didn't reply. He turned and walked into the rain. Back at the warehouse, sleep refused to come. He replayed every second of the encounter. The old man's voice. The melody. The photographs. The impossible certainty. By sunrise, Elias had filled an entire notebook with questions. Who is Samuel Arden? Military? Former detective? Psychologist? Con artist? Nothing fit. By afternoon, Elias began investigating. Within hours he had hacked public archives, searched newspaper databases, property records, tax files, even hospital registrations. Samuel Arden. Age 78. Retired piano teacher. Blind for 32 years. Widower. No children. No criminal record. No military service. No government employment. No unusual financial activity. His neighbors described him with almost identical words. Quiet. Kind. Always polite. He teaches piano. He never leaves after sunset. He plays every midnight. Nothing explained the previous night. If anything, the mystery deepened. That evening, Elias parked across the street before sunset. Using binoculars, he watched the house carefully. At exactly 6 o'clock, a young girl carrying sheet music arrived for her piano lesson. At 7, she left smiling. Then came an elderly couple. Later, a teenage boy. Each student remained less than an hour. Samuel treated everyone with the same gentle patience. Nothing unusual happened. No secret visitors. No coded conversations. No suspicious deliveries. Just music. As darkness settled over Ashcroft, the neighborhood grew silent once more. At precisely midnight, Samuel began playing. Not the lullaby. Something entirely different. A haunting nocturne flowed through the open window. Its melody rose and fell like waves beneath moonlight. Elias closed his eyes. Without warning, a memory surfaced. A little girl running through a field of wildflowers. Dark hair dancing in the wind. Laughing. Elias. She turned toward him. Catch me. His younger sister. Clara. He hadn't thought about her smile in 20 years. The memory vanished before he could hold on to it. Elias opened his eyes, breathing heavily. What are you doing to me? He whispered. The music continued. Every note peeled away another layer of memories he had buried beneath years of discipline. Not forced. Simply, invited. The next afternoon, Elias visited the city's historical library. An elderly librarian recognized Samuel's name immediately. Oh, Mr. Arden. She smiled warmly. One of the finest pianists this city ever produced. He performed. For many years. What happened? The woman's smile faded. There was an accident. What kind? A terrible fire. Elias felt something tighten inside him. When? She checked an old newspaper archive. 25 years ago. His heartbeat quickened. The fire took his eyesight. And, his wife. Elias stared silently at the yellowed newspaper clipping. Fire. 25 years ago. The same year his own life had fallen apart. Coincidence? Or something else? Before leaving, he asked one final question. Did Samuel ever have children? The librarian shook her head. No. Then she hesitated. There were rumors. What rumors? That he once planned to adopt. But after the fire. She lowered her voice. He never spoke about it again. That night, Elias returned. This time he knocked without hesitation. Samuel opened the door before his hand touched it. I was beginning to think curiosity had lost. You expected me. I've been expecting you for much longer than one day. Elias stepped inside. I need answers. Samuel smiled gently. Of course you do. Start talking. Instead, Samuel walked to a small wooden cabinet. He removed an old envelope. Yellowed with age. Its edges were worn from being handled countless times. He held it toward Elias. This belongs to you. Elias took it cautiously. There was no address. Only 2 handwritten words across the front. When ready. His fingers hesitated. You may open it whenever you wish. What's inside? The first truth. Elias slowly unfolded the envelope. Inside rested a single sheet of paper. Nothing else. Only one sentence written in elegant handwriting. You're finally ready. His pulse quickened. What does this mean? Samuel remained silent. Who wrote this? No answer. Was it you? Still nothing. Elias looked up. The old man sat once more at the piano. Without speaking, Samuel placed his fingers on the keys. The familiar lullaby filled the room again. Only this time. There was something new hidden beneath it. A second melody. Soft. Almost impossible to hear. Yet unmistakably intentional. It sounded less like music. And more like a message waiting to be understood. As the final note faded into silence, Samuel spoke only one sentence. The melody remembers what people choose to forget. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, Elias realized the greatest mystery of his life had only just begun. The sentence echoed in Elias Thorne's mind long after he left Samuel Arden's house. The melody remembers what people choose to forget. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Ashcroft still glistened beneath the streetlights. Every reflection seemed distorted, as though the city itself had become unfamiliar. For the first time in 20 years, Elias wasn't planning a heist. He was chasing a question. And questions, he had learned, could be far more dangerous than locked vaults. Back at his warehouse, he spread dozens of files across a large oak table. Blueprints, newspaper clippings, census records, hospital archives, school registries, fire department reports, everything connected to Samuel Arden. He searched until sunrise. Nothing. Samuel's life appeared painfully ordinary. Born in Ashcroft. Studied classical piano. Married at 28. Opened a music school. Lost his sight in a house fire 25 years ago. His wife died in that same fire. Afterward, he lived quietly, teaching children and rarely leaving his home. No criminal connections. No hidden bank accounts. No unexplained travel. No evidence that he had ever crossed paths with Elias Thorne. It didn't make sense. People didn't know impossible songs by accident. 3 nights later, Elias returned. This time he didn't knock. Instead, he climbed onto the roof of the neighboring house and watched through an upstairs window. Samuel sat alone at the piano. No audience. No students. Only silence. At exactly midnight, he began playing. But tonight, the melody changed. It began with the familiar lullaby his mother had once played. Then, without warning, it drifted into another piece. A slower passage. A darker one. The notes seemed to carry sorrow instead of comfort. Elias felt his chest tighten. Suddenly, a memory broke free. He was 12 years old. The smell of fresh bread filled a tiny kitchen. His younger sister Clara sat beside an old piano, swinging her legs as their mother smiled warmly. "You'll both remember this song forever," she whispered. Clara giggled. "I'll play it better than Elias." "You already do," their mother laughed. Elias rolled his eyes. "I don't even like piano." His mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day, music will find you again." He had laughed. He never imagined those would be among the last peaceful words she'd ever speak. The memory shattered. Elias stumbled backward on the rooftop, breathing hard. His hands trembled violently. That conversation. He had forgotten it completely. Not buried. Forgotten. How could a melody unlock memories he didn't even know still existed? The next morning, Elias visited the city's oldest church. The building had stood for nearly a century, surviving storms, wars, and fires. An elderly priest greeted him. "You look troubled." "I'm looking for records." "What kind?" "A family." The priest guided him into a small archive room beneath the church. Dust floated through thin beams of sunlight. Old baptism records lined the shelves. Marriage certificates. Funeral registries. Birth records. Hours passed. Finally, Elias found his family's name. His father's record. His mother's. Clara's. His own. But tucked behind the file was something unexpected. A folded newspaper clipping. Its headline read, "Local music teacher saves child during house fire." The article was dated 25 years earlier. Elias began reading. The fire had spread rapidly through a residential neighborhood. Several homes were destroyed. Among those injured was local pianist Samuel Arden, who reportedly entered a burning house to rescue a child trapped inside. The child survived. Samuel lost his eyesight. His wife later died from smoke inhalation. Elias frowned. The rescued child's name had been smudged by age. Impossible to read. He looked at the priest. "Do you know who the child was?" The priest shook his head sadly. "That was many years ago. I was just a young assistant then. Most records were lost." Elias folded the clipping carefully and slipped it into his coat. Something about it refused to leave his mind. That evening, he followed Samuel after piano lessons ended. For the first time, the old man left his house after sunset. Walking with a white cane, Samuel moved confidently through the quiet streets. Not toward town. Toward the old cemetery overlooking Ashcroft. Elias stayed hidden among the trees. Samuel stopped before a weathered gravestone. He knelt slowly. Placed fresh white lilies at its base. Then he spoke softly. "I'm still waiting." A long silence followed. Finally. "I think he's beginning to remember." Elias felt a chill race through his body. Who was he talking about? The old man remained there for nearly an hour before quietly walking home. Once Samuel disappeared, Elias approached the grave. The inscription read, "Margaret Arden. Beloved wife. Beloved musician. Forever in our hearts." Below those words was a single engraved line. "Music remembers every soul it touches." Exactly the same idea Samuel had spoken days earlier. Unable to ignore his instincts, Elias returned to Samuel's house later that night. The lights were off. He circled the building carefully. A second-floor window stood slightly open. Old habit took over. Within seconds he had climbed inside without making a sound. The room appeared to be a study. Books filled every wall. Most were about music. Some were journals. Others contained handwritten compositions. Everything sat in perfect order. Too perfect. Elias searched carefully. Inside one desk drawer he found stacks of sheet music. Hundreds of pages. Every piece carried a handwritten date in the upper right corner. At first they seemed random. Until he noticed something. The dates weren't random at all. They matched nights he had committed some of his greatest robberies. The Royal Mint burglary. The Harcourt diamond theft. The St. Vincent Museum break-in. The Geneva collection. Every major heist. Each date had its own musical composition. Elias stared in disbelief. "No." He whispered. "That's impossible." Had Samuel somehow predicted every crime? Or had he written these pieces afterward? Before Elias could examine them further, a floorboard creaked behind him. He spun instantly. Samuel stood quietly in the doorway. Still holding his white cane. Still wearing the same calm expression. You found them. Elias slowly lowered the papers. You knew I was here. I knew you'd come eventually. You should be angry. Samuel smiled. Why? I broke into your home. You've spent your entire life breaking into places. Samuel tilted his head slightly. I wasn't expecting you to knock. Elias remained silent. The old man walked slowly toward the piano. Without looking, he rested one hand on its polished surface. I wrote every one of those pieces. Why? They helped me remember. Remember what? Samuel's face grew unusually serious. The nights when another soul drifted further into darkness. Elias felt a knot form in his stomach. You were writing about me. I was praying for you. Silence filled the room. You don't even know me. Samuel turned toward him. Oh, Elias. I've known you longer than you know yourself. Those words struck harder than any accusation ever could. Elias opened his mouth to demand answers. Instead, Samuel reached into his coat pocket and removed a small object wrapped in faded blue cloth. He placed it gently on the piano. Take it. What is it? Something that has belonged to you, for 25 years. Elias hesitated before carefully unwrapping the cloth. Inside lay a tiny silver music box. Its paint had faded. One corner was blackened by fire. His breath caught. He knew it instantly. Clara's music box. The birthday gift he had saved for months to buy his little sister. He had watched it disappear in the flames. Or so he had always believed. His hands began shaking. Where? His voice cracked. Where did you get this? Samuel's expression was filled not with triumph, but with sadness. I've been keeping it safe. For the day you were ready to ask the right questions. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky once more. Inside the quiet house, Elias realized that the fire which had destroyed his childhood had not taken everything. Some memories had survived. And someone had been protecting them, all along. The tiny silver music box felt heavier than gold in Elias Thorne's hands. Its edges were scorched by fire. The delicate floral engravings had faded with time, but there was no mistaking it. He remembered the day he had bought it. He had been 14 years old, spending nearly every dollar he had earned repairing bicycles around the neighborhood. Clara had wanted something that could sing forever. When he presented the little music box on her birthday, she had hugged him so tightly that he could barely breathe. Promise you'll never let anyone steal it, she had whispered. He had laughed. No one could ever steal from me. Now, 25 years later, it rested once again in his trembling hands. You've had this all these years? Elias asked quietly. Samuel nodded. I found it after the fire. You were there. I was. You entered our house. Yes. Elias looked directly at the blind man. Then tell me what happened. Samuel remained silent for several moments before answering. There are truths that cannot be understood all at once. I've had enough riddles. I know. Then stop speaking like a puzzle. Samuel slowly walked toward the fireplace and lowered himself into an old wooden chair. The night of the fire. He stopped. Is not where the story begins. Samuel reached toward a nearby bookshelf. Without seeing it, his fingers landed precisely on a thick leather journal. He placed it on the table between them. This belonged to my wife. Elias opened the journal carefully. Every page contained handwritten musical notes. Not diary entries. Not letters. Music. Hundreds of unfinished compositions. Each one carried a name. Hope. Forgiveness. Autumn rain. The boy at the window. One title caught Elias's attention. The Keeper of Locked Hearts. What does this mean? Samuel smiled faintly. Margaret believed every person carried a song. A song? Not with words. A melody. She said music revealed what people spent their lives trying to hide. Elias looked unconvinced. You actually believe that? I still do. Samuel folded his hands. She could sit beside someone for 5 minutes, then compose a piece that sounded exactly like their soul. Elias shook his head. That's impossible. So is a blind man recognizing a thief standing outside his window. The room fell silent. Elias turned another page. The handwriting suddenly changed. Instead of music, there were several sketches. Buildings. Streets. A church. A small wooden house. His house. His breath caught. Margaret drew this? Yes. When? About 6 months before the fire. Elias studied the drawing more closely. Standing beside the house were 4 tiny figures. His mother. His father. Clara. Himself. Even their old dog had been included. But there was something else. Across the street stood another figure. A woman at a piano. Margaret. Watching. We were neighbors. Samuel nodded. For nearly 3 years. Elias looked up, stunned. I don't remember. You were young. You and Clara often played in our garden. His chest tightened. No. You used to bring Margaret wildflowers every Sunday. I would remember that. Samuel smiled sadly. Would you? Memory wasn't as reliable as people believed. Trauma had erased entire chapters of Elias's childhood. Not hidden them. Erased them. Samuel stood slowly. Come with me. He led Elias toward a narrow staircase. At the end of the hallway stood a locked door. Samuel reached into his pocket. Removed a small brass key. Unlocked it. The room beyond had remained untouched for decades. Dust floated through moonlight spilling from a single window. An upright piano rested against one wall. Beside it stood shelves filled with hundreds of neatly stacked music manuscripts. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood. This was Margaret's studio. Elias stepped inside carefully. Nothing had moved. Not even the pencils lying beside unfinished sheet music. On one wall hung dozens of photographs. Students. Concerts. Family gatherings. One picture stopped him cold. A summer picnic. Samuel. Margaret. His own mother. His father. Clara. And himself. All smiling together. Elias picked up the frame with shaking hands. This. His voice barely escaped. This can't be real. It is. We knew each other. Our families were close. He stared at the photograph. His father looked younger. Kinder. Nothing like the angry man Elias remembered after the fire. What happened to us? Samuel looked toward the window. Fear. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Elias asked the question that had haunted him since the first night. Did my father start the fire? Samuel closed his eyes. No. The answer surprised him. I always believed. I know. My father confessed. Samuel nodded slowly. He confessed because he believed he deserved punishment. What does that mean? It means guilt and responsibility are not always the same thing. Elias felt frustration rising again. Please. No more riddles. Samuel walked to a cabinet and opened its lowest drawer. Inside rested dozens of newspaper clippings. Every one carefully preserved. Headlines stretched across faded paper. Local fire claims 2 homes. Pianist loses sight-saving child. Investigation closed after gas explosion. Samuel handed Elias another clipping. This one never reached the newspapers. It wasn't a newspaper. It was an official investigation report. Half the pages were burned. Most signatures were missing. But one paragraph remained readable. Evidence suggests the fire originated in the abandoned property adjacent to both residences. Cause remains undetermined due to extensive structural damage. Elias frowned. Adjacent property? Our houses weren't where the fire began. He looked at Samuel. Then why did everyone believe my father caused it? Samuel sighed heavily. Because someone needed a man to blame. The old grandfather clock downstairs chimed 1 o'clock. The sound echoed through the silent house. Elias's entire understanding of his past had begun to crumble. My father. He swallowed hard. Spent the rest of his life believing he destroyed 2 families. Samuel nodded. He carried that burden willingly. But why? Samuel looked toward the photograph still resting in Elias's hands. Because protecting someone he loved mattered more than protecting himself. Those words struck Elias harder than anything he had heard before. Protecting who? His mother? Clara? Samuel? Someone else? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. Samuel crossed the room to Margaret's piano. He gently lifted the lid. This piano has never been tuned by another person. His fingers rested lightly on the worn ivory keys. There is something hidden inside. Elias immediately inspected the instrument. He searched beneath the keyboard. Behind the pedals. Along the wooden frame. Finally, he discovered a nearly invisible compartment built into the underside. He carefully slid it open. Inside rested a small bundle tied with faded blue ribbon. Letters. Dozens of them. All unopened. Each envelope carried the same handwriting. Each one addressed to a single person. Elias Thorne. His heart nearly stopped. There. For me. Samuel nodded. Margaret wrote one every year after the fire. But she. His voice faltered. I thought she died that night. Samuel looked at him with quiet sorrow. She did. Confusion flooded Elias's face. Then who wrote these? Samuel answered softly. I did. The room fell completely silent. I promised her. Samuel whispered. That if you ever came back, if you ever found your way home, I would make sure you knew the truth she wanted you to hear. Elias slowly picked up the first envelope. His fingers trembled so violently he could barely hold it. On the back was a single sentence. Some doors are locked to protect treasure. Others are locked to protect the heart. Open this only when you're ready to forgive. Elias stared at the words, unable to breathe. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside the quiet music room, he realized that every vault he had ever opened had been easier than opening the first letter waiting for him. Elias stared at the first envelope for what felt like an eternity. His hands had dismantled high-security vaults in under 3 minutes. Yet now, he could not bring himself to break a paper seal. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of an old wall clock. Samuel remained seated at Margaret's piano, saying nothing. Some journeys could not be rushed. Finally, Elias slid one finger beneath the brittle flap. The envelope opened with a quiet crackle. Inside was a single handwritten page. The ink had faded, but every word was perfectly legible. Dear Elias. If you are reading this, then the music has done what words never could. It has brought you back. You have spent years believing your family was destroyed by one terrible mistake. But tragedies are rarely born from a single moment. They grow quietly from fear, pride, and silence. There is one truth you deserve to know above all others. Your father was never the man people believed he was. Elias stopped reading. His breathing became uneven. My father confessed, he whispered. I heard it myself. Samuel nodded slowly. He confessed. But confession and guilt are not always the same. Elias looked up. Then tell me everything. Samuel closed his clouded eyes. For a long moment, it seemed as if he were listening, not to the room, but to memories only he could hear. When I tell you this story, he said softly, you must promise not to interrupt. Elias nodded. I promise. 25 years ago, Samuel began, our neighborhood was more than a collection of houses. It was a family. Your mother often played piano with Margaret on Sunday afternoons. Your father repaired clocks for half the town. People trusted him because he could fix almost anything. Elias smiled faintly despite himself. He barely remembered his father's workshop. Only the smell of machine oil and polished brass. Samuel continued. Across the street stood an abandoned warehouse. It had been empty for years. But one autumn evening, it wasn't empty anymore. Elias leaned forward. A group of smugglers had begun hiding stolen military explosives inside. They chose the warehouse because no one visited it. No one except your father. Elias frowned. He found them. By accident. He had been asked to repair an old wall clock that still hung inside the building. When he entered, he discovered crates filled with illegal explosives. Samuel's voice grew quieter. He immediately decided to report it. But someone saw him leave. The smugglers knew they had been discovered. They couldn't risk exposure. So they returned after midnight. Their plan was simple. Destroy the evidence. They intended to burn the warehouse. But they underestimated what was inside. The explosives ignited. The first explosion shattered every window on the street. The second sent burning debris across nearby rooftops. The third, Samuel swallowed, started the fire that reached our homes. Elias sat frozen. The warehouse. It wasn't our house. Samuel shook his head. No. The fire never began in your home. It came from next door. Images flooded Elias's mind. Broken glass. Smoke. People screaming. His mother's frightened voice. Clara crying. For years he had remembered only scattered fragments. Now they slowly aligned into something recognizable. The explosion. I remember hearing it. Samuel nodded. That was the beginning. When the flames spread, everyone ran. I reached your house first. Margaret was behind me. Your father was already inside. He had gone back to save Clara. Elias closed his eyes. He could almost see it. The roof collapsed before he reached the stairs. He managed to push Clara toward a window. I caught her. But your father remained trapped. Samuel's voice trembled for the first time. Margaret heard someone else crying. She ran back inside. My wife believed no child should ever die alone. Tears slowly formed beneath Samuel's clouded eyes. I followed her. The room remained completely still. Elias barely dared breathe. Samuel continued. The smoke was unbearable. I found you unconscious beneath a fallen beam. You couldn't have been more than 14. I carried you outside. When I turned back, I couldn't find Margaret. His hands tightened around his cane. Part of the ceiling collapsed. I tried to reach her. I don't remember much after that. Only heat. And darkness. When I woke in the hospital, my eyesight was gone. So was my wife. Elias lowered his head. I'm sorry. Samuel smiled gently. So was I. But none of that explains my father. Samuel nodded. It does. When the investigation began, the smugglers had disappeared. The warehouse had burned to its foundation. The evidence was gone. There were no witnesses willing to speak. The authorities demanded answers. People wanted someone responsible. And your father gave them one. He claimed the fire began because of faulty electrical work in his own workshop. Elias stared in disbelief. He lied. Yes. But why? Because the smugglers had threatened your family. If he exposed them, they promised they would finish what the fire had started. So he sacrificed himself. He believed prison was a smaller price than risking the lives of those he loved. Elias felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. His entire life had been built upon a lie. I hated him. The words escaped before he realized he had spoken them. I spent years believing he destroyed everything. Samuel said nothing. I refused to visit him. I ignored every letter he sent. His voice cracked. When he died, I never even attended the funeral. Silence answered him. Then Samuel quietly asked, "Do you know what his final request was?" Elias slowly shook his head. He asked the prison chaplain to deliver one message if you were ever found. Samuel reached into his jacket pocket. He unfolded a worn piece of paper. I've carried it for 12 years. He handed it to Elias. The handwriting was rough. Shaking. But unmistakably his father's. Son. If you still hate me, I understand. Hatred is lighter to carry than guilt. But don't let it become your home. I never wanted you to inherit my silence. Live honestly. Open no door that forces you to lock your own heart. I have always loved you. Dad. A single tear landed on the paper. Then another. Elias tried to wipe them away. More followed. He had not cried since he was a teenager. He had convinced himself tears belonged to weaker men. Now they came without permission. For his father. For his mother. For Clara. For every year stolen by a lie. Samuel rose slowly from the piano bench. Without speaking, he sat before the keyboard. His fingers rested lightly on the worn ivory keys. This, he whispered, is the complete lullaby. The version your mother and Margaret composed together. I've never played it for anyone else. The first note filled the room. It was familiar. Yet different. The melody Elias remembered had always seemed unfinished. Now, it unfolded completely. Gentle at first. Then hopeful. Then heartbreakingly beautiful. Every phrase seemed to carry the voices of people long gone. His mother's laughter. Margaret's kindness. Clara's innocent joy. His father's quiet strength. The music didn't erase his pain. It gave it meaning. By the time the final note faded into silence, Elias Thorne was no longer the same man who had walked into Samuel Arden's house. For the first time in 25 years, the master thief understood what had truly been stolen from him. It had never been money. It had never been jewels. It had been the truth. And now that truth had finally found its way home. The morning sunlight crept through the warehouse windows, illuminating a room filled with the trophies of a lifetime. Rows of locked cases. Rare jewels. Stacks of bearer bonds. Priceless paintings wrapped in protective cloth. Ancient coins. Golden watches. Masterpieces stolen from private collections across 3 continents. For years, Elias Thorne had believed these objects represented victory. Now they looked like evidence. Evidence of a man who had spent 25 years running from the wrong enemy. He wasn't running from the police. He wasn't running from rival thieves. He had been running from the truth. Elias slowly walked through the warehouse, stopping before each display case. The sapphire from the Blackwood Museum. A diamond necklace taken from a corrupt billionaire. A Roman gold coin stolen from a private collector who had trafficked artifacts for decades. Each item had once symbolized perfection. Now they symbolized emptiness. He opened the first case. Then the second. Then another. One by one, he removed every stolen treasure and placed it into plain wooden crates. By sunset, the warehouse no longer resembled a thief's sanctuary. It looked like a shipping depot preparing to return history to its rightful owners. Only one empty case remained. It was reserved for his final mission. That evening, Elias returned to Samuel's house. The old pianist was already waiting beside the fire. "You've made your decision," Samuel said before Elias spoke. "I have." Samuel smiled faintly. "What will you steal?" "The truth." Samuel nodded. "The most difficult treasure of all." Elias placed an old investigation report onto the table. "The official file is incomplete. Someone removed pages. They didn't disappear. They were hidden." Samuel tilted his head. "You know where?" "I think I do." For 3 days, Elias disappeared into the city's archives. Not the public records. The forgotten ones. Construction blueprints. Municipal engineering reports. Government storage maps. Everything connected to the investigation from 25 years earlier. Eventually, one document caught his attention. When the original police headquarters had been renovated 15 years ago, every unsolved investigation had been transferred to a secure evidence repository beneath the Ashcroft Hall of Justice. A climate-controlled vault. Protected by biometric scanners. Pressure-sensitive floors. 24-hour surveillance. Modern security. Ironically, exactly the sort of challenge Elias had once enjoyed. But this time, he wasn't going in for profit. He was going in for redemption. Midnight. Ashcroft Hall of Justice stood silent beneath a pale moon. Rain clouds drifted across the sky, hiding the stars. From the rooftop across the street, Elias studied the building through binoculars. His old instincts returned effortlessly. Guard rotations every 11 minutes. Thermal cameras. Motion detectors. 2 security officers inside the evidence wing. Nothing he hadn't overcome before. Yet tonight felt different. His heartbeat wasn't driven by excitement. It was driven by purpose. He whispered to himself. "This is the last one." Inside the ventilation system, everything felt painfully familiar. Every crawl. Every calculation. Every silent landing. Years of experience guided him without conscious thought. Within minutes he reached the evidence vault. A steel door nearly 18 inches thick blocked his path. Most people saw a vault. Elias saw a puzzle. He removed a small leather tool roll. Listening carefully, he pressed a stethoscope against the locking mechanism. Click. Pause. Another click. Slowly. One by one. 7 locking bars disengaged. The massive door eased open. Inside stretched endless rows of evidence shelves. Thousands of sealed boxes. Every one catalogued. Every one forgotten. Elias searched quickly. Case 4178. Fire investigation. Year 25. His hands found it. A gray archival box covered in dust. He opened it carefully. Inside lay photographs. Witness statements. Burned fragments of official reports. Then, a sealed brown envelope marked "Confidential. Do not destroy." His pulse quickened. He opened it. Inside rested a cassette tape. Several photographs. An signed confession. Not from his father. From someone named Victor Harlan. Elias frowned. He had never heard the name before. The confession described everything. Victor had been one of the smugglers using the abandoned warehouse. He admitted they had started the fire while attempting to destroy illegal explosives. He confessed they had threatened Elias's father into accepting responsibility. He named every member of the criminal group. The confession had been signed 24 years earlier. Then buried. Never presented in court. Never released publicly. Someone had hidden it. Someone powerful. Footsteps echoed outside. Elias immediately switched off his flashlight. 2 security officers stopped outside the vault. One looked inside. Thought I heard something. The second shrugged. Probably the ventilation. They continued walking. Elias waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Only then did he breathe again. He carefully packed every document into a waterproof satchel. As he turned to leave, his eyes fell upon one final folder. His own criminal file. Elias hesitated. Curiosity 1. He opened it. Inside were photographs spanning nearly 20 years. Every known robbery. Every suspected alias. Every failed attempt to identify him. At the very bottom rested a handwritten note from the detective who had hunted him longest. This thief never steals from ordinary people. He avoids violence. He returns sentimental items whenever possible. Whatever made him choose this life. I believe he still wants to become the man he was meant to be. There was no signature. Only initials. Dar. For the first time, Elias wondered whether someone had seen the good still buried beneath his crimes. He quietly closed the file, leaving it exactly where he had found it. The escape should have been simple. Instead, the fire alarm suddenly activated. Red emergency lights flooded the hallway. A voice echoed through the building. Security lockdown initiated. Every exit sealed automatically. Elias froze. This wasn't supposed to happen. He hadn't triggered any alarm. Somebody else had. Heavy footsteps thundered toward the evidence wing. Dozens this time. Not 2. A full tactical response. Elias searched rapidly for another route. Nothing. Every corridor had become a trap. Then, his phone vibrated. One new message. No number. Only 2 words. Trust music. His heart skipped. Samuel. At that exact moment. Through the building's old ventilation ducts. He heard it. A piano. Faint. Distant. Impossible. Samuel's lullaby. The melody drifted through the air as though the old pianist were sitting just beyond the walls. Elias closed his eyes. Listening. The pauses between the notes formed a pattern. Left. 3 steps. Pause. Right. 6 steps. Turn. The rhythm wasn't merely music. It was directions. He opened his eyes. Following the melody exactly, he discovered an old maintenance passage hidden behind movable shelving. A forgotten escape tunnel from the building's original construction. The blueprints had never mentioned it. Within minutes he emerged into an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city. Safe. Breathing heavily. Still carrying the evidence. Just before dawn, Elias returned to Samuel's house. The old pianist sat silently beside the window. He had not moved. You knew. Samuel smiled. I remembered. You guided me. I reminded you. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Samuel looked toward the rising sun. When you were a little boy, you and Clara loved exploring abandoned places. You discovered that tunnel long before anyone sealed its entrance. You showed it to Margaret. And she. Samuel gently touched the piano keys. Turned it into a melody so neither of you would ever forget the way home. Elias stood speechless. The directions had never been hidden in the music. They had always been there. Waiting for the child he used to be. He slowly placed the recovered evidence onto Samuel's piano. We have the truth. Samuel rested one hand on the worn brown envelope. No, Elias. His voice was soft. We finally have a chance to set it free. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke over Ashcroft. For the first time in decades, Elias Thorne watched a new day begin without planning another theft. His final heist had not made him richer. It had made him whole. For the first time in 25 years. Elias Thorne walked into a police station through the front door. No disguise. No escape plan. No hidden tools. Only a weathered leather satchel resting against his shoulder. The morning desk sergeant looked up in mild surprise. Can I help you? Elias placed the satchel on the counter. I need to speak with Detective Daniel Rhodes. The name brought an immediate reaction. The retired detective? Yes. It's important. The sergeant hesitated before making the call. Less than an hour later, a silver-haired man entered the station wearing a worn brown coat. Though retired for several years, Detective Daniel Rhodes still carried himself like a policeman. His sharp eyes settled on Elias. For several seconds neither man spoke. Finally, Rhodes smiled. I always imagined we'd meet like this. You knew. I hoped. Elias frowned. You wrote the note in my file. Rhodes nodded. I did. You believed I could change. I believed people are more complicated than the worst thing they've ever done. Elias slowly placed the recovered evidence onto the table. I think you'll want to read this. 3 hours later. The station had transformed into controlled chaos. Senior investigators rushed between offices. Archivists verified signatures. Forensic experts examined the decades-old confession. The cassette tape was carefully restored. When the audio finally played, the room fell silent. A frightened man's voice filled the speakers. My name is Victor Harlan. I helped store military explosives inside the abandoned warehouse on Willow Street. We burned the building. We thought no one would get hurt. When the houses caught fire, we forced Arthur Thorne to accept the blame. If anyone learns the truth, they'll kill him. The recording ended. No one spoke. Detective Rhodes removed his glasses. I've spent 24 years trying to find this. He looked toward Elias. Where did you get it? Elias simply answered. From the only vault that ever truly mattered. Rhodes didn't ask another question. Some mysteries deserve to remain acts of grace. Within days, the city announced the reopening of the Willow Street fire investigation. Newspapers across the state carried the story. New evidence exonerates local man decades after tragic fire. Arthur Thorne's conviction was officially overturned. His name was cleared. Though he had been gone for 12 years. The truth finally reached him. A memorial service was organized for everyone lost in the fire. Families gathered beneath gray autumn skies. Flowers covered the church steps. Elias stood quietly near the back. He wasn't sure he deserved to stand among them. Samuel found him before the ceremony began. You came. I almost didn't. Samuel smiled. Forgiveness often arrives before we believe we've earned it. Inside the church, the restored silver music box rested beside photographs of those who had died. Margaret Arden. Arthur Thorne. Elias's mother, Eleanor. Young Clara. The priest invited anyone who wished to speak. Silence lingered. Then, Elias slowly walked toward the podium. Hundreds of eyes followed him. His voice trembled. My name. He paused. Is Elias Thorne. I've spent most of my life hiding. Hiding from the police. Hiding from my past. And hiding from the people I loved. He looked toward his father's photograph. I believe my father destroyed our family. I was wrong. I never gave him the chance to tell me the truth. His eyes filled with tears. I cannot give him back the years I stole from him. I cannot apologize to my mother. I cannot hear Clara laugh again. He took a slow breath. But I can choose what kind of man I become today. The church remained completely silent. I have committed crimes. Many. I cannot erase them. So beginning this morning, I will spend the rest of my life returning everything I took. No one moved. No one interrupted. Even Detective Rhodes lowered his head respectfully. The following weeks became national news. Anonymous deliveries began arriving at museums. Private collectors discovered stolen paintings left on their doorsteps. Rare jewelry appeared inside locked display cases before employees opened for business. Historical artifacts quietly returned to the countries from which they had disappeared. No demands. No explanations. Only handwritten notes. Some treasures belong to history. Please forgive the delay. Authorities quickly realized who was responsible. Yet something remarkable happened. Instead of celebrating another arrest, people watched a man dismantle the empire he had spent decades building. Piece by piece. Until nothing remained. One cold November evening, Samuel invited Elias to the old music room. Candles glowed softly around Margaret's piano. Every chair had been filled. Former students. Neighbors. Children. Friends. No advertisements had announced the gathering. Word had simply spread. Samuel sat before the piano. His hands rested quietly on the keys. This, he said softly, will be my final concert. The room grew still. I once believed music existed to be heard. He smiled gently. I was wrong. It exists to be remembered. He began to play. The complete lullaby floated through the room one final time. But something had changed. It no longer sounded sorrowful. It sounded peaceful. Every note carried acceptance. Every pause carried love. Elias closed his eyes. He no longer saw flames. He saw summer afternoons. His mother smiling beside Margaret. His father repairing clocks. Clara dancing barefoot across the garden. For the first time, those memories no longer hurt. They healed. Samuel reached the final movement. His breathing slowed. His hands grew lighter. The last note lingered in the air. Long after his fingers stopped moving. The audience waited. No applause came. Elias opened his eyes. Samuel remained seated. A peaceful smile rested upon his face. He had quietly passed away. Exactly where he had always belonged. Behind the piano. Wrapped in music. 1 year later. The abandoned Victorian house looked completely different. Fresh white paint covered the walls. The neglected garden bloomed once again. A new wooden sign stood beside the gate. The Margaret Arden School of Music. Founded by Elias Thorne. Children filled the hallways with laughter. Some could see. Some could not. All were welcomed equally. No tuition was ever charged. The treasures Elias had returned came with reward money offered by grateful owners. Every dollar funded the school. The greatest thief in Ashcroft's history had become its quietest benefactor. One spring afternoon. A young blind boy sat alone before Margaret's piano. His fingers hesitated above the keys. "I don't think I can play it," the child whispered. Elias knelt beside him. "Neither did I." The boy smiled nervously. "What if I make mistakes?" Elias looked toward Samuel's empty chair. Then back at the child. "The people who taught me something important once. They said perfect music isn't made by perfect hands. It's made by an honest heart." The boy nodded. He pressed the first key. Then another. The familiar lullaby slowly filled the room. Outside, sunlight poured through the windows. The wind carried the melody into the streets of Ashcroft, where strangers paused without knowing why it felt so familiar. Elias closed his eyes and smiled. For years, he had believed every lock could be opened with enough skill. Samuel had taught him otherwise. Some locks were forged from grief. Some from regret. Some from fear. And none of them yielded to force. Only truth. Only forgiveness. Only love. As the final note drifted into silence, Elias looked at the children filling the music school with laughter. The greatest treasure he had ever stolen was never hidden inside a vault. It was the chance to begin again. And unlike every jewel he had ever held, this was one treasure he would spend the rest of his life giving away.